everybody. Welcome to the Kind Faith for the weekend. Glad you're tuning in, and I hope this is a blessing for you. The question that starts off this message this weekend is, where is it that faith matters? Where is it that faith matters? We're going to read a passage of scripture from Mark. We're in chapter 8, and if you remember, last week we talked about the first 10 verses of Mark chapter 8, where Jesus has fed 4,000. He fed the 5,000, he fed 4,000, and now we pick up the story starting in verse 11. And we're going to read three vignettes, three micro stories in line right after the feeding of the 4,000. And I'm going to read them and talk about them a bit, and then we'll dive into that question of, where does faith matter? Here is Mark chapter 8, verse 11. Then the Pharisees came and began to argue with him, seeking from him a sign from heaven to test him. And he sighed deeply in his spirit and said, "Why does this generation seek a sign? Truly I say to you, no sign will be given to this generation." And he left them and got into the boat and went to the other side. If you're really familiar with scripture, I'll talk about this for a second and then we'll come back to it. But if you're really familiar with scripture, there's a passage in Matthew, same thing happens. They come demand a sign, and Jesus says, "Truly I tell you, no sign will be given to you except the sign of Jonah," which is 3 days in the belly of the whale and then out. And he was talking about the sign of his death and resurrection. And Matthew kind of fills out the sign. Here in Mark, he leaves off that part of Jesus's comment to the Pharisees. And maybe there was another time where the same question was asked and Jesus responded with, "No sign will be given except the sign of Jonah." But here in Mark, he just leaves it, "No sign will be given this generation." We're going to come back to that. That should be a speed bump for you. That should be a speed bump for you. Let's read the next piece. Now, they had forgotten to bring bread, and they had only one loaf with them in the boat. Remember, there's at least 13 of them in the boat, counting Jesus. And Jesus cautioned them, saying, "Watch out, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and the leaven of Herod." And they began discussing with one another the fact that they had no bread. And Jesus, aware of this, said to them, "Why are you discussing the fact that you have no bread? Did you not yet perceive? Do you not yet perceive and understand? Are your hearts hardened? Do you have eyes but do not see? Do you have ears but do not hear? And do you not remember when I broke the 5 loaves for 5,000? How many basketfuls were left over?" 12, they said. "And 7 for 4,000? How many basketfuls were left over? How many pieces did you pick up?" 7. He said, "Do you not understand?" This is a fascinating conversation. We're going to jump into these one by one, but I'm going to keep reading. "So then they come to Bethsaida, and some people brought to him a blind man and begged him to touch him. And he took the blind man by the hand, led him out of the village, and when he had spit on his eyes and laid his hands on him, he asked him, 'Do you see anything?' And he looked up, and he said, 'I see people, but they look like trees walking.' Then Jesus laid hands on his eyes again. He opened his eyes. His sight was restored. He saw everything clearly, and he sent him home, saying, 'Don't even enter the village. Just go home.'" Okay, 3 stories. The driving question: where is it that faith truly matters? And let's talk about this first conversation. The Pharisees came and began to argue with him, seeking for him a sign from heaven to test him. He sighed deeply and said, "Why does this generation seek a sign? Truly I say to you, no sign will be given." Anybody else in their mind go, What? Excuse me? First of all, they're asking for a sign, and 4,000 people just got fed miraculously. and 5,000 before that, and a blind man healed before that, and a lame man made to walk, and a leper healed of his leprosy, and on it goes. And they want a sign. What is this desire for a sign that they're craving? And let's just step back and ask a simple question. What do signs do? What do signs do? Well, you probably remember the time before GPS and you didn't get everything right there on your phone, and you got on a highway and you were desperate to see a sign. I would go back and forth between Austin, Texas and Southern California when Marcy and I were dating, and on one particular occasion I decided to go a way that I hadn't gone before, and I remember getting to a fork, not a fork in the road, but a dead end, and it was either right or left. And I had to remember which was north and which was south. And I wasn't really confident, and I wasn't fully oriented. And so I decided to go left, and then desperately strained to see the sign that confirmed that Lubbock, Texas was in front of me instead of behind me. Remember when you had to strain to see signs and how important it was to see those signs? What did the sign do for you? The sign provided assurance, confidence, and comfort. The sign provided assurance, confidence, and comfort. And that's the kind of sign that the Pharisees are coming for. They want assurance, confidence, and comfort, and they want direction. They're hoping that Jesus would provide something that gives assurance, confidence, comfort, and direction. And Jesus says, I'm not going to do that. Did you pick up on what Jesus said, or what was observed about Jesus in verse 12? What was observed about Jesus in verse 12 is he sighed deeply in his spirit. What were the things that encouraged Jesus most and depressed Jesus most? What depressed Jesus most, and we read it in this next part of the story, is a lack of faith. What encouraged Jesus most was the expression of faith. Remember when the Roman centurion came to Jesus and said, my servant is sick, come to my house. Or Jesus says, I will go to your house to heal your servant. And the centurion says, you don't need to come to my house because I know that you can just say the word and my servant will be healed. And Jesus was amazed at his faith. One of the few places where Jesus is amazed. So he is encouraged most by the expression of faith. He's discouraged most when people lack faith and have little faith. So faith becomes this big thing. And here's my question. Where is it that the Pharisees should have been exercising faith? It's in the moment when they are lacking direction and in the moment when they're most uncomfortable. Jesus had provided all of this amazing work that would allow them to put their faith in him. But what Jesus hadn't fully and finally established, we see it in retrospect, but Matthew picked it up in the gospel, was the sign. The sign was his death and resurrection. That was it. And that hadn't come yet. And so Jesus sighs deeply in his spirit because there's no faith, and they're not willing to have faith in the moment when they're not comfortable and they don't know the direction they're going. Remember the beginning question. Where is faith most important? It's most important in that space where you want comfort, but you don't have it. And you want assurance of direction, and don't have it. That's the place where faith is most to be applied. For the Pharisees here, that's the lack of faith that they've got, and Jesus' deep sigh that in this place they don't have faith. And we look down at the disciples in the boat next. There's so much here, by the way. For those of you who are hardcore Bible scholars, I know I'm skipping over and passing a bunch of nuggets that are golden. And I know on our deck out here when we do church this weekend, we'll talk about some nuggets that I missed and didn't talk about. But look at what happens next. So they'd forgotten to bring bread. Isn't that hilarious? There's a highlight here and a theme going on with Mark. Did they really forget to bring bread? Maybe they don't have actual physical bread for lunch, but they've got the bread of life in Jesus with them. There's this hilarious contrast going on in this passage. So they'd forgotten to bring bread, really, had they? But they only had one loaf. And then Jesus cautions them and says, beware, watch out, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and the leaven of Herod. What's happening here? Well, we're having a conversation about faith. Jesus sighs deeply in his spirit because they want this sign instead of resting in faith. They're uncomfortable, and they, instead of resting in faith, want a sign. They don't know what direction they're going, and instead of depending on their faith, they want to put their dependence on a sign. And now, here is this conversation about the leaven. What is the leaven of the Pharisees? The leaven of the Pharisees is their promise that if the people of God will absolutely hold to the rules of God, then the blessings of God will flow. That's the leaven. And where is it that they're asking the people of God to put their faith, actually? In their rules, in their ways, in the way that they think people should be living. That's where faith should be put, expressed, and lived. And then God, who we have faith in, will bless us. So do you see how insidious it is? It seems like it's faith in God, but it's actually faith in behavioral norms and beliefs and right use of words and language. It's hiding in plain sight, but that's why Jesus warns them, beware, because the scribes and Pharisees want you to put your faith in their style of living so that God will bless. What's the leaven of Herod? Well, Herod is depending on Rome and collecting taxes for Rome and building his power, but what was the promise of Rome? The promise of Rome was a unified, stable, lawful world. That was the promise of Rome. They would civilize the world, they would stabilize the world, they would bring enlightenment to the world. And so the leaven is that people would be tempted to put their faith in the power that Rome holds, in the power that Herod holds, instead of in God. So Jesus says, beware of that. And the question we're asking is, where does faith matter? And hilariously, the disciples forgot to bring bread. They didn't. The bread is in the boat in Jesus, but they have a single loaf. Jesus then says, beware of the leaven of the scribes and Pharisees and Herod. And they get arguing now about the bread. I'm not quite sure how all of that connected in their minds, but theologically, it's pretty amazing all that is going on here. And then Jesus rebukes them and says, do you not understand? You don't need to worry about your lunch. So not only do you not need to worry about the leaven and folding the leaven of the scribes and Pharisees into your life and Herod so that you'll get blessings either from the emperor or from God because of your obedience, but also your hunger You don't need to depend on anything other than the bread, Jesus, for your hunger. And this is pretty fascinating because they have a loaf. It's not going to satisfy everybody. Everybody gets a bite. They're on the boat. They're hungry. Jesus says, look, I can provide food whenever you want. I can rain down manna from heaven. I can multiply this loaf. But he doesn't. Do you notice that? He doesn't. Why? Because where faith matters is in the moments of our hunger. Where faith matters is in the moments where we feel lost and need a sign. Where faith matters is those moments where we're seeking comfort and confidence. That's where faith matters. And Jesus is calling and teaching us that we're to apply our faith in the place that faith matters. In the space where lack of comfort exists, where hunger exists, where lack of direction exists. That's where faith matters. And then we get the third story, where this blind man comes. And it's a weird story. We've talked about the weird healings of Jesus. This is the second time spit is used. This time he doesn't make a mud pie. He just spits it pretty clearly. So here's what it says. They came to Bethsaida. Some people brought to him a blind man and begged him to touch him. He took the blind man by hand, led him out of the village. And when he had spit on his eyes and laid his hands on him, he asked him, do you see anything? What an odd story, right? I mean, we're back to spit. We talked about that a couple weeks ago. I'm not going to belabor that point here, but he is partially healed. What's the point here? He's partially healed. He's not fully healed. He can kind of see, but he can't see clearly. Where does faith matter? Faith matters in the moments between starting the healing and the ultimate healing. That's where faith matters. The faith that the disciples were to have was faith in the midst of their hunger. The faith that the scribes and Pharisees were to have was faith when they were in the place of having lost the way and needing comfort. And the faith for the blind man is faith in the place where the healing hasn't been completed. So where are you? If you had to associate with one of these three stories, which one would you associate with? Do you feel like you're in that place of a Pharisee? I'm not calling you a Pharisee, but are you in that place of a Pharisee where you're wishing you had absolute comfort and assurance and direction? Well, this is the place to apply faith. Or are you with the disciples and you're in your hunger, you're craving, you're longing, you're straining, and this is the place for faith? Or are you with the blind man and your healing is partial? It's not completed, it's not fulfilled. The clarity hasn't come. That's the place for faith for you. So now that we've talked about this and we all realize, okay, I need to exercise faith in this place, what does that look like? What does that look like? What would it have looked like for the Pharisees? What did it look like for the disciples? What does it look like for the blind man? It all looks like engaging, faith looks like engaging personally with Jesus fully. I say that and I'm guessing some of you are like, oh, well, what does that mean? But here's what it means for me. When I'm hungry, identify it, declare it, and then be with Jesus in my hunger. In the space in between. Not necessarily demanding fulfillment, but just being with Jesus in the hunger. What does it mean when I'm insecure and lack direction? It means being with Jesus in the lack of direction and abiding with him. I have this meditation practice that I do, and I commend it to you. In those moments where I feel those things, I imagine in my mind Jesus in the middle of a meadow, and I'm a little kid, and as I run into the middle of the meadow and I climb up into his lap, and I just am with Jesus. And I say to him, I'm hungry, I'm scared, I'm really uncomfortable. When is this going to end? When are we going to get to completion? And I just declare those things to him, and I abide with him in that. I wish there was a more complex step-by-step process for applying your faith in this circumstance, but that's the best I got. We'll take some time as a group to share maybe ways that you have figured out that I don't know, but will you apply faith in the spaces where you are craving comfort, direction, where you're hungry, and where the healing is not complete and final? That's my hope for us, that we will be people of faith. May God bless you.